Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys about something that always cracks me up when I see it out there, because you frequently see people on forums, magazines, even article writers, a lot of people out there who they love to bash the big three. And believe me, even though I'm a strength athlete and a strength coach, I don't always say that the big three are the be all end all by any means. But it feels like a lot of times people become so anti big three that they reach a level of delusion, to where you really can't listen to people anymore because they literally have no clue what they're talking about because they almost reach like a big three derangement syndrome. And the perfect example are the people who say, oh, the bench press isn't a good hypertrophy exercise. It doesn't work certain muscles. And you have to look at them and go, well, what muscles do you think are used in the bench press? And they'll say stuff, oh, it's just a cheater exercise with a big arch and an ultra wide grip. And then look at what I'm doing. I have an arch there, right? And they'll talk about, oh, it's just a really short range of motion movement. Does that look like a short range of motion to you? It's a couple feet. So you have to look at them and say, well, which muscles do you think are moving that weight? I mean, realistically speaking, if you see a reasonably strong power lifter who's not using a massive cheater arch, right, who's using a respectable range of motion, he puts 315 on the bar and cranks out 4 or 5 reps. What muscles do you think are moving that weight? And people will get so ludicrous and they'll say, oh, yeah, well, the power lifts, they're just leverages and they're about connective tissue. They're just about tendons, not muscles. And I've heard things like that. But then you go, well, again, tendons and bones aren't capable of moving weight. So if you can rep 315 on the bench press, there has to be some muscles involved, right? There has to be some muscles involved. And in fact, let's say that by comparison, you're using less weight on dumbbells versus the barbell bench. Well, that's less work being done. That's less work being done. So how could you even argue that more muscles are being used to move the weight? Now, the exception being that of course, dumbbells allow for a longer range of motion. Okay, dumbbells allow for a longer range of motion, but if you're not benching ultra wide with a massive arch, still a pretty big range of motion exercise. Again, refer to the video of me above doing my close grip work, using a little bit of an arch. But that's not a 4-inch range of motion. That's a pretty respectable range of motion, and I'm doing pretty high reps. That looks kind of like bodybuilding training to me, doesn't it? Doing sets of 10 to 12 reps for a long range of motion with control. But I'm a power lifter. Yes, this is my supplemental work to make my pecs and my triceps bigger for a bigger bench. Because let's be realistic. How do you get a big bench? Well, you should probably get your pecs and triceps big and strong. That would help. Of course, I know my triceps need a lot of work. We're working on it actively, so I'm aware that they're small. They're small. I need to get them bigger so I can have a bigger bench. So realistically, when you look at these lifts and all the power lifters saying, oh yeah, we've got to bring these muscles up so that we can move more weight, at a certain point, people who are against the bench press, they have to realize there's muscles moving the weight. So I would almost ask them, well, which muscles do you think are doing all the work? Like, well, it's not a great chest exercise. Well, actually, all the EMG data and biomechanics says it works the hell out of the pecs. Chest is a primary mover on the bench press. You cannot remove that fact. And if you're using a very, very heavy weight for a respectable range of motion, how could your pecs not be getting activated? Okay, it's not even possible. It's not possible for them to not get activated. And then they'll say stuff like, well, it's just all shoulders. Okay, so if it's all shoulders and you're able to move that kind of weight, wouldn't everyone who benches heavy have massive shoulders then? If they're doing all the work. But then when you take an exercise like the overhead press, for me to do the same number of reps, I've got to take a plate off each side. For those curious, no, that's not just 145. Those are calibrated plates. They're very thin. So I think I've got 230 on the bar there for my rep work on that close grip. I have to take a full plate off to replicate this with an overhead press. So if shoulders are the only thing being worked on bench, you should be able to overhead press as much as we bench. Almost nobody can do that. There's a few people who can, but they're extremely rare. They're the far exception, not the norm. So it can't be all shoulders because you just be able to do the same weight. The pecs are bridging the gap because you're using a ton of pec, and that's why most of us can bench at least a full plate more per side. For on rep work, we're not even talking about maxes, we're talking about doing reps where we know we build that muscle. All right, we can do a full plate more per side for a 10 rep set on benching at least. At least. You know, and then they're like, okay, well, maybe the triceps are doing all the work. Okay, fair enough. Triceps play a massive role in the bench. For more advanced lifters, we have to do a ton of tricep work because our bench volume isn't enough to get our triceps growing. Now, the novice lifter, that's true. But here's what I would say again to these bros who say that. It's like, well, if the triceps are doing all the work, then why bother to do tricep work? Just do a ton of bench press early on and your triceps will get massive. Why are you guys doing extensions if the bench is all tricep? If you believe that that's the case, why bother? Just do tons of pressing. But they all do extensions, don't they? So they're inconsistent. So it's like you ask each different bro who says the bench isn't a great hypertrophy exercise or it doesn't work the chest. They always give you some other muscle that they think it works. But then my question to them is like, well, it's a big exercise that you're moving a lot of weight on, so clearly there's an enormous muscle fiber stimulation happening. If you think it's all shoulders or all triceps, why don't you just do this as your main shoulder or tricep exercise? If that's the case, but they don't. Because they're not logically consistent. They're illogical about it. Now, realistically, can a novice lifter do nothing but pressing and get pretty good triceps? Yes, they can. More advanced lifters, that's usually not the case. Not the case for me. I'm having to do a ton of extra tricep work. It's the way I'm built. Now, we have studies on novice lifters that show that adding a tricep extension to the bench press if volume is high enough doesn't cause any extra muscle growth in the triceps. Right? That's been studied. There have been studies directly comparing that in novice lifters where they take bench press and if they do enough volume to grow their pecs to grow, their triceps reach a certain amount of growth. If they take another group and they have them do the same bench training and they add tricep extensions, their triceps don't seem to grow any faster from it. So for the novice lifter, bench press seems to be more than enough to get all the tricep activation you need. The problem is that as we get more advanced, that's not the case because the triceps really don't do quite as much work as the pecs do. And it's actually quite easy for most people, depending on how you're built, who do nothing at benching and pressing for their triceps to end up with triceps that are lagging. Because you might not hit your effective training volume to keep them growing because they are a secondary muscle on the bench. But it can get to the point to where for a bench presser who's trying to get a big max bench, that they have to do extra tricep work because the triceps still play a very, very prominent role in the bench. It's just that from a muscle activation perspective, they don't get as much as the pecs. So if you're using just the bench to build everything, you can end up with lagging triceps. But if you make your triceps grow, your max bench will still go up. And that's generally true, actually. Getting big triceps, particularly the lateral and medial head, will contribute significantly to a better bench press, particularly for people who stick on the top third of the movement on a max, who have to grind through there. Triceps will make or break you at that point. Same thing with upper back. When you're trying to get really strong on the bench, even though we don't think of the upper back as a mover, getting your upper back well developed will help your bench a lot. It'll really help you out of the bottom of your bench, right? It'll really help you with that start, the first few inches, tremendously. But when it comes to the hypertrophy itself, you can get big, massive pecs off the bench press. If your pecs are not growing from the bench press, it's because you don't know how to perform the bench press. You're too loose on it. You don't have your scapula retracted. You don't have the shoulder blades pulled down and back. You're not sending your traps into the bench hard, so you're not getting that deep stretch on the pecs. You probably have your shoulders rolled forward. You might not be touching your chest. So you don't have the shoulder blades down and back, and you're not touching your chest probably. You're not tight, so therefore you're not getting maximum pec activation out of the very bottom. So if you're getting tons of bench pressing in and you're getting stronger and stronger at the bench, and your pecs aren't growing, odds are is that you're not using the pecs effectively because you're using a bastardized version of the lift that's not correct. And if you just learned to do it correctly, your bench would go up even faster because then you would be using more pectoral on it, which is a big muscle. You would actually get a lot stronger more quickly on it if you learned how to incorporate your pecs more. Just because you don't know how to perform the exercise if they're not growing. It's not the exercise's fault that you're doing it incorrectly. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.